A man in a suit that costs more than most people's cars walks into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, not with humility, but with an air of pure annoyance, as if the law is just a minor inconvenience to his very important day. He thought his wealth and status would make this a quick, painless affair. But when he openly mocks a humble, elderly nun standing before the judge, he's about to receive a masterclass in respect that will leave the entire gallery speechless. He laughed at her poverty, but Judge Caprio's reaction is a moment you will never forget. The Providence Municipal Court was buzzing with its usual quiet tension. The scent of old wood and worn paper filled the air as people from all walks of life waited for their name to be called, their fates resting in the hands of one man. But one individual, Mr. Alistair Sterling, clearly felt he didn't belong. He sat in the second row, legs crossed, impeccably tailored suit jacket unbuttoned just enough to reveal a sliver of a designer tie. He wasn't paying attention to the proceedings. His eyes were glued to his top-of-the-line smartphone, his thumb swiping dismissively through what were likely important emails and stock market updates. Every few minutes he'd glance at his gold watch, letting out an exasperated sigh that was just loud enough for those around him to hear. He was a portrait of entitled impatience. We've all seen someone who acts like the world owes them something. If you agree that character is more important than cash, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Judge Stories YT. The court calls Sister Mary Catherine, the bailiff announced. A tiny elderly woman in a simple black and white habit rose slowly from the back of the courtroom. Her hands, wrinkled with age and service, nervously clutched a small worn beaded rosary. She approached the bench with hesitant steps, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reverence for the institution she now stood in. She looked frail, a stark contrast to the power and prestige of the courtroom itself. Mr. Sterling barely looked up from his phone, but when he did, a contemptuous smirk briefly flickered across his face before he returned to his screen. Judge Caprio's typically stern courtroom expression softened the moment he saw her. He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Good morning, sister. Please don't be nervous. Let's see what we have here." He scanned the document in front of him. "It says here you have an unpaid parking ticket. Can you tell me what happened?" Sister Mary Catherine leaned into the microphone, her voice barely a whisper. "Your Honor, I'm so sorry. I was visiting a sick parishioner from St. Anne's. He has no family, and I brought him some soup. We got to talking, and I'm afraid I completely lost track of time. When I came out, the ticket was on my car. It was my fault entirely." Her honesty was pure and disarming. The entire gallery seemed to lean in, their hearts going out to the elderly nun. This is the kind of humanity that makes Judge Caprio's courtroom so special. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because stories of kindness and compassion are needed all over the world. Judge Caprio listened intently, his chin resting on his hand. "And you do this often, sister?" "Visit the sick?" he asked kindly. She nodded. "It is my calling, Your Honor. Our convent, we don't have much, but we try to provide comfort where we can. We live on very small donations." She looked down at her hands. "To be honest, Your Honor, the fine, it is a significant amount for us. It would come out of the funds we use to buy food for our soup kitchen. But I know a law is a law, and I must pay." It was at that moment the mention of a soup kitchen, of charity, of a life dedicated to others, that a sound cut through the quiet respect of the courtroom. It was a short, sharp, guttural sound. A laugh. All eyes snapped towards Mr. Alistair Sterling. He had his hand over his mouth, but it wasn't enough to hide the mocking grin spreading across his face. He'd found the nun's predicament, her poverty, her simple life of service, amusing. The laugh was a dagger of disrespect, and it plunged the room into a shocked, icy silence. Sister Mary Catherine flinched as if struck, her cheeks turning a deep shade of red. The bailiff stiffened, his hand moving towards his side. But it was Judge Caprio who reacted with the most chilling stillness. He had been looking down at the nun's ticket, a compassionate smile forming on his lips, but at the sound of that laugh, his head snapped up. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a cold, hard fire. His gaze swept past the nun, past the bailiff, and locked directly onto Mr. Sterling. The entitled driver's smile faltered, wilting under the weight of the judge's stare. The air grew thick and heavy. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. In a low, dangerously calm tone that carried to every corner of the silent room, he spoke. "Sir," he said, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Stand up." Mr. Sterling froze, his arrogant smirk evaporating as the collective glare of the courtroom pinned him in place. For a moment he seemed to consider ignoring the judge's command, but the bailiff took a single, deliberate step in his direction, and the man reluctantly pushed himself to his feet. He smoothed the front of his jacket, a nervous, preening gesture that did nothing to hide the sudden flush on his neck. "Yes, Your Honor?" he asked, his voice laced with an icy condescension, as if he were a CEO addressing an underperforming employee. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his elbows resting on the bench, his fingers steepled. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. "I heard you laugh," Judge Caprio stated, "not as a question, but as a fact. This woman, a servant of God who dedicates her life to caring for the sick and the poor, stands before this court with humility and honesty, and you find it amusing. Explain yourself." The command was soft, yet it cracked like a whip in the silent room. Mr. Sterling shifted his weight. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe I have a right to my own private reactions. I just found the whole situation quaint. A ticket for a nun? It's like something out of an old movie." He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that reeked of privilege. The word quaint hung in the air, dripping with scorn. He wasn't just laughing at a nun, he was mocking a life of service he couldn't possibly comprehend. Subscribe to Judge Stories YT if you want to see more moments where entitled behavior meets real consequences. Sister Mary Catherine, mortified by the attention, turned slightly. "Your Honor, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's all right. He meant no harm." Her immediate instinct was to forgive, to smooth things over, to protect the very man who had just insulted her. It was a moment of grace that only served to magnify Mr. Sterling's profound lack of it. Judge Caprio gave the nun a brief, reassuring nod, but his eyes never left Sterling. "She may be willing to forgive your disrespect, sir, but this court is not. Your private reaction was a public display of contempt. Contempt for that woman, and contempt for the proceedings of this room." Judge Caprio then looked to the bailiff. "What is this gentleman's name?" The bailiff read from his clipboard. "Alistair Sterling, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly, a storm gathering behind his eyes. He then turned back to the terrified nun. "Sister, would you please have a seat for a moment? We will come back to your case shortly." He then slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "The court will now hear the case of the state versus Alistair Sterling." A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. Mr. Sterling's face twisted in a mixture of shock and anger. "Your Honor, my case wasn't scheduled for another hour. I have a very important merger meeting to attend," he protested, his voice rising in panic. "Your meeting will have to wait," Judge Caprio said, his voice flat and final. "Your disruption has moved you to the front of the line. Approach the bench." Fuming, Mr. Sterling strode to the defendant's podium, his expensive leather shoes clicking angrily on the linoleum floor. He snatched the paper from the bailiff without a word of thanks. Judge Caprio picked up a new document, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Sterling, you are here for a moving violation. You were cited for driving 55 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour school zone during active school hours." Gasps erupted from the gallery. A woman in the front row clutched her chest. The sheer recklessness of the act, compared to the nun's gentle transgression, was staggering. Sterling scoffed. "Your Honor, the road was empty. It's a ridiculous speed trap. I'm a very busy man, the CEO of Sterling Acquisitions. My time is valuable. Frankly, the officer should have been focused on actual criminals instead of harassing a taxpayer like me." He delivered the excuse with the supreme confidence of a man who had never been told no in his life. He truly believed his wealth and his title placed him above the laws designed to protect children. Judge Caprio listened to the entire pathetic defense without interruption. He let the silence stretch out, letting Mr. Sterling's words hang in the air and convict him more than any prosecutor could. The judge then slowly lowered his gaze from Mr. Sterling's arrogant face to the 2 tickets sitting on his bench. One was for a nun who parked illegally to bring soup to a dying man. The other was for a CEO who endangered the lives of children because he was in a hurry. He looked up, his face a mask of cold fury, and his next words made the entire courtroom hold its breath. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice dangerously low, "you are concerned about your valuable time. I am concerned about the value of a human life. Before I pass judgment on you, I want you to turn around. Turn around and look at Sister Mary Catherine." Alistair Sterling stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle pulsed in his cheek. The judge's command was simple, yet for a man like Sterling it was a profound humiliation. To be forced to acknowledge the very person he had so openly scorned was anathema to his entire being. He hesitated, a silent war being waged between his pride and the dawning realization of the judge's absolute authority. "Sir," I said, "turn around," Judge Caprio repeated, his voice dropping a decibel, losing any trace of patience. The steel in his tone made it clear this was not a suggestion. Slowly, as if moving through concrete, Sterling turned. His eyes, full of venomous resentment, met the gentle, forgiving gaze of Sister Mary Catherine. She was sitting where he had been, in the second row, her small frame almost lost on the large wooden bench. She wasn't glaring at him with righteous anger. Instead, her face was filled with a look of profound pity, which was somehow a far deeper wound to his ego than any expression of hatred could have been. "You see that woman, Mr. Sterling?" Judge Caprio's voice boomed from behind him, making him flinch. "You laughed at her. You saw her simple clothes, her humble demeanor, and you decided she was beneath you. You heard her story of compassion, of taking time out of her day for no monetary gain, simply to comfort a lonely soul, and you found it laughable." Judge Caprio stood up, a rare move that signaled the gravity of the moment. He placed his hands on his hips, his black robes giving him an almost biblical authority. The entire courtroom was captivated, watching a masterclass in moral justice unfold. If you believe that true wealth is measured by kindness, not by your bank account, hit that like button and subscribe to Judge Stories YT. We need more of this in the world. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at her," the judge continued, his voice resonating with power. "I see a life of sacrifice. I see a woman who has dedicated herself not to acquiring assets, but to alleviating suffering. Her net worth isn't measured in stocks and bonds, but in the lives she has touched. The fine she faces, which you found so amusing, is not a personal inconvenience. It is a blow to the community she serves. That money would have become a warm meal for someone who has nothing." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Sterling's face had paled considerably. The condescending smirk was long gone, replaced by a mask of grim realization. He was no longer a big shot in a boardroom. He was a schoolboy being dressed down by the principal. "Now let's talk about you, Mr. Sterling. You in your $1,000 suit, driving a car that costs more than her convent's yearly budget. You were speeding through a school zone. Not by 5 miles an hour, not by 10, but more than double the speed limit. A speed limit designed to protect our most precious and vulnerable citizens, our children." Judge Caprio pointed a finger directly at Sterling. "While this good sister was holding the hand of a sick man, you were flooring the accelerator past a playground. You talk about your valuable time. What value do you place on the life of a child, Mr. Sterling? A first grader chasing a ball into the street who wouldn't have stood a chance against your 2-ton luxury missile?" The question hung in the air, a horrifying, vivid image that made several people in the gallery gasp. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The legal proceeding had transformed into a raw, public trial of one man's character. Let us know where you're watching from, because the lesson Judge Caprio is teaching here is universal. "You believe your wealth elevates you," Judge Caprio said, his voice now a low, intense growl. "Let me be perfectly clear. In this courtroom, your money means nothing. Your title means nothing. The only thing that matters here is the content of your character. And from where I'm sitting, Mr. Sterling, you are the poorest man in this room." The insult was devastatingly precise, striking at the very core of Sterling's identity. He visibly recoiled, his face contorting in a flash of pure rage, before settling back into a sullen mask. He opened his mouth to protest, to offer another excuse, but Judge Caprio cut him off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. "I am not finished." The judge walked to the edge of the bench, leaning over it to look down at the disgraced CEO. His voice was now quiet, almost conversational, but it carried an edge of cold steel that was more intimidating than any shout. "We have 2 tickets here today, 2 citizens who broke the law. One did it out of an act of compassion, and the other out of an act of pure, unadulterated selfishness." He picked up Sister Mary Catherine's ticket in one hand and Mr. Sterling's in the other. He held them up for the whole court to see. Justice is not always about applying the letter of the law blindly. It is about wisdom. It is about understanding intent. And it is about making the punishment fit the crime and the criminal. He looked from the tickets to Sister Mary Catherine's gentle face, and then back to Alistair Sterling's stony expression. A slow, thoughtful smile spread across Judge Caprio's face, the kind of smile that signals a truly brilliant and utterly unexpected idea has just been born. "I have made my decision," he announced to the silent waiting courtroom, "and it involves both of you." The collective breath of the courtroom was held in a single, silent moment of anticipation. Judge Caprio's words, "It involves both of you," hung in the air, charged with possibility. Alistair Sterling's eyes narrowed with suspicion, while Sister Mary Catherine looked up from her seat, her expression one of gentle confusion. What could the judge possibly have in mind that would link her humble parking violation with this man's dangerous recklessness? Judge Caprio placed both tickets down on the bench in front of him, side by side. He looked first to the nun. "Sister Mary Catherine, please rise and approach the bench once more." She did so, her small figure standing in stark, almost poetic contrast to the tall, rigid form of Mr. Sterling. They stood a few feet apart, a physical representation of the vast moral canyon that separated their worlds. "Sister," Judge Caprio began, his voice returning to the warm, respectful tone he had used with her earlier. "You have admitted your fault. You have shown remorse, and your violation occurred in the commission of a selfless act. This court values compassion. Therefore, your parking ticket in the amount of $50 is hereby dismissed." A wave of relieved sighs and quiet applause rippled through the gallery. Sister Mary Catherine's eyes welled with tears of gratitude. "Oh, thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. God bless you," she whispered, clutching her rosary to her chest. Judge Caprio gave her a kind smile. "God bless you, sister, but please do not leave just yet. Your part in this is not quite over." Her brows furrowed in confusion, but she nodded and remained standing. Then the judge's entire demeanor shifted. He turned his body, his full attention now a crushing weight upon Alistair Sterling. The temperature in the room plummeted once more. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice as sharp as shattered glass, "your violation was not selfless. It was selfish. It was not compassionate. It was reckless. You showed no remorse, only arrogance. You showed contempt not only for the law, but for a person in this very courtroom who embodies the virtues you so clearly lack." The judge paused, his eyes boring into Sterling. "The fine for driving 55 in a 25-mile-per-hour school zone is $500. A substantial amount. But for a man like you, it's nothing. You'd pay it with a swipe of your credit card and forget it by lunchtime. It would teach you absolutely nothing. A fine is not a punishment for you, Mr. Sterling. It is merely the cost of doing business as you please. This is the moment we all wait for, where justice isn't just a transaction, but a lesson. If you believe our courts need more judges with this kind of wisdom, show your support by subscribing to Judge Stories YT." Mr. Sterling stood silent, his face a thunderous mask. He knew better than to argue now. He could see the trap closing around him. "So a simple fine will not suffice," Judge Caprio continued, a predatory gleam in his eye. "A punishment must be meaningful. It must be corrective. It must force you to confront the very arrogance that brought you here today." He picked up Sister Mary Catherine's dismissed ticket. This ticket, for $50, represented a genuine hardship for a woman who serves the poor, a hardship you found hilarious. He then picked up Sterling's ticket. This ticket, for $500, represents a danger you pose to innocent children, a danger you dismissed as an inconvenience. He held one in each hand. Therefore, I am going to make you an offer, Mr. Sterling. It is a choice. You can either pay the maximum possible fine for your violation, which this court will set at $1,000. A gasp went through the room. Sterling's eyes widened in outrage at the doubled amount. Or, the judge said, cutting off his impending protest, you can choose another option. An option that will cost you far less money, but perhaps a great deal more of something you hold even dearer, your pride. He let the proposition hang in the air, a tantalizing and terrifying mystery. The entire gallery leaned forward, desperate to hear the alternative. Sterling, ever the businessman, was intrigued despite his anger. $1,000 was an insulting sum, but if the other option was less financially damaging— "What is the other option, Your Honor?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Judge Caprio looked from Sterling to the nun and back again. A slow, deliberate smile spread across his face. "The other option is simple, Mr. Sterling. I will reduce your fine from $1,000 down to the original $50 of Sister Mary Catherine's ticket." Sterling's eyes lit up. This was it. The easy way out. He had weathered the lecture, and now he would get off with a pittance. He almost couldn't contain his smirk of triumph. But the judge wasn't finished. "However," Judge Caprio added, and the single word silenced the room, "there is one condition." He pointed a finger at the humble nun. "You must pay her fine, not to the court. You will hand the $50 in cash directly to Sister Mary Catherine, and when you do, you will look her in the eye and you will apologize. Not just for laughing at her, but for failing to understand what a life of service truly means." The courtroom erupted in a flurry of shocked whispers. The judge was not just seeking a penalty. He was orchestrating an act of penance. He was forcing the titan of industry to bow, metaphorically, before the humble servant of God. The choice was Sterling's. A massive financial blow, or a shattering blow to his ego. For a moment he just stared, his mind racing, the gears of his pride grinding against the logic of his wallet. The entire room watched, breathless, waiting to see which he valued more. The silence in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom was a living thing. It was thick with the weight of Alistair Sterling's decision. Every eye was on him, the wealthy CEO cornered not by legal precedent, but by a profound moral challenge. $1,000 was an annoyance, a sting to his wallet that he would complain about over cocktails later. But $50, offered with an apology to the woman he'd scorned? That was an assault on his very identity. He looked at the judge's unflinching gaze, then at the expectant faces in the gallery, and finally his eyes landed again on Sister Mary Catherine. She stood there, not with a look of triumph, but with the same gentle pity she'd shown him before. In that moment, something inside him seemed to break. The fight, the arrogance, the sheer bluster that had carried him through life, finally cracked. He took a deep breath, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I'll take the second option, Your Honor," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Judge Caprio nodded slowly, his expression giving nothing away. "Very well. Do you have the $50 on you?" Sterling reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket, his hand fumbling for a moment before pulling out a slim, alligator-skin wallet. He opened it, revealing a thick stack of $100 bills. He flipped past them, his fingers searching for smaller denominations, a public display of wealth that now seemed utterly pathetic. He pulled out a $50 bill. The bailiff, anticipating the judge's next move, silently opened the gate of the defendant's box. Mr. Sterling stepped out, his movements stiff and awkward. He walked the few feet that separated him from Sister Mary Catherine, the short distance feeling like a mile. He stood before her, the crisp $50 bill held awkwardly in his hand. She was so much smaller than him, yet in that moment she seemed to possess all the power in the room. He cleared his throat, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Caprio's voice cut in, sharp and clear. The court's instruction was to look her in the eye. Sterling flinched. Reluctantly, painfully, he lowered his gaze and met hers. What he saw there was not judgment or condemnation, but a simple, profound humanity. It disarmed him completely. "Sister," he began, his voice barely a croak. He had to stop and clear his throat again. "Sister, I am sorry." The words were quiet, but they echoed through the silent courtroom. "I'm sorry for my behavior, for laughing. It was disrespectful and wrong." He extended his hand, offering her the money. Sister Mary Catherine did not take it immediately. Instead, she placed her small, wrinkled hand gently over his. "The apology is accepted, my son," she said, her voice filled with a grace that was almost supernatural. "And I thank you for this. But it will not go to me." She gently took the bill from his fingers. "With the court's permission," she said, turning to Judge Caprio, "this will go directly into our soup kitchen fund. It will provide a great many warm meals." Judge Caprio smiled, a genuine warm smile that lit up his entire face. "Permission granted, sister. That is the best possible use for it." The entire gallery erupted, not in loud, raucous cheers, but in a wave of heartfelt, sustained applause. It wasn't just for the judge's wisdom or the nun's grace. It was for the small, fragile flicker of redemption they had just witnessed. Mr. Sterling stood frozen for a moment, watching the nun clutch the $50 like it was a winning lottery ticket. The sight of her genuine joy over a sum he considered pocket change seemed to land a final, decisive blow to his ego. He turned back towards the bench, his face no longer a mask of anger, but of something else entirely chastened, humbled, and perhaps for the first time in a very long time, reflective. "Mr. Sterling," said Judge Caprio, his voice now calm and measured, "your legal obligation to this court is fulfilled. You are free to go. I suggest you drive carefully on your way to that merger meeting." Sterling gave a short, jerky nod. He didn't offer any more excuses or protests. He simply turned and walked out of the courtroom, no longer with the arrogant stride of a CEO, but with the quiet, shuffling steps of a man who had been fundamentally changed. He never once looked back. Judge Caprio watched him go before turning his final attention back to the nun. "Sister Mary Catherine, thank you for your patience and for the lesson in grace you have taught us all today." "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied, her eyes shining. "You have been more than just. You have been kind." With a final nod, she turned and made her way out of the courtroom, $50 richer, leaving behind a room filled with people who had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. Alistair Sterling walked in believing his money made him important. He walked out realizing that in the things that truly matter, character, compassion, and respect, he was the poorest man in the room. Judge Caprio reminded us all that true justice isn't about punishment, it's about wisdom. What do you think Mr. Sterling learned that day? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Judge Stories YT for more incredible courtroom moments that restore your faith in humanity.